The first time I realized I was different was on a Greyhound bus. I was 9 years old, sitting beside my mother, watching the highway stretch endlessly through the heat waves of a Mississippi summer. We were traveling from Jackson to Memphis, visiting my aunt. I had never been outside of Jackson before, never seen the wide open roads where the trees gave way to flatlands and the sky felt impossibly big. The bus was full, mostly quiet except for the occasional cough or the shuffle of someone adjusting in their seat. My mother sat still, her purse clutched in her lap, her fingers tight around the strap. I didn't understand why she looked so tense. Then the bus stopped. A small station in a nameless town. A few people got off, a few more got on. That's when I noticed it. The change. A man, tall, heavy-set, white, stepped onto the bus. He scanned the seats, his eyes moving over every passenger before settling on me and my mother. He didn't move at first, just stared, his jaw working like he was chewing on something bitter. Then he spoke. "You're in the wrong seat." I looked around, confused. The bus was almost full, but there were a few empty spots near the front. I turned to my mother. She didn't look at me, didn't even acknowledge the man. He took a step closer. "You hear me, woman?" My mother swallowed. "We're fine right here." Hey, wait. His voice was sharper now. Others on the bus started shifting uncomfortably. Some looked out the window. Some stared at their laps. No one spoke. The driver, a thin man in a blue uniform, glanced back through the rearview mirror but didn't say a word. The man reached up and tapped the "whites only" sign above our seat. "This here's my seat," he said, voice low, dangerous. "Y'all need to move." I looked at my mother, expecting her to argue, to fight back, but she didn't. She just stood, grabbed my hand, and pulled me toward the back of the bus. The man sat down, smiling as he stretched his legs out. No one said anything. I wanted to ask why we had to move, why we couldn't sit where we wanted, why no one had stopped him, but when I looked at my mother's face, I kept my mouth shut. She was staring straight ahead, jaw tight, her fingers digging into her purse strap. It wasn't until years later that I understood what silence costs. By the time I was 16, I had learned the rules. I knew which stores to avoid, which streets to walk down, which looks meant trouble. I knew that you didn't talk back, didn't run when you saw the police, didn't linger too long in places where you weren't wanted. And I knew that the bus wasn't the last time I'd have to move just because someone didn't want me there. But there's a difference between knowing something and accepting it. And I had never accepted it. Not until the summer of 1961. That was the summer of the Freedom Riders. Men and women, black and white, traveling through the South on buses, sitting side by side, refusing to move. The first time I saw them was in the Jackson newspaper. Their faces were printed in black and white, some smiling, some bruised and bloodied, all of them arrested. I read that article a dozen times, tracing the lines of their faces, imagining myself sitting with them. And then, one afternoon, I saw them in real life. They came through Jackson, walking down the street like they belonged there. People whispered. Some cursed under their breath. I just watched, and then I saw him. Marcus Bell. He was a year older than me, tall, quiet, always got the best grades in school. We weren't close, but we had known each other since we were kids. And now he was walking with them. Walking like he wasn't afraid. Like he wasn't worried about what might happen. I caught his eye as he passed. He nodded at me. That was all it took. That night I told my mother I was going out. I didn't tell her where. I found them at the station, sitting together, waiting for the next bus. Marcus saw me first. He smiled. Didn't think I'd see you here. I hesitated, then sat beside him. I didn't think I'd come. You staying? I didn't know how to answer. Then the bus arrived. The ride was quiet at first. Then the first rock hit the window. Then another. Then came the shouting. The bus kept going, but I could feel the tension inside. Everyone was waiting. Bracing. Then the driver slowed down. The road ahead was blocked. A group of men stood in the street, waiting. Some held bats, some held knives. One had a chain wrapped around his fist. The bus doors opened. The driver stepped out. No one moved. Then someone shouted, "Time to go." Marcus was the first to stand. And I hesitated. For the first time in my life, I saw what courage really looked like. It looked like Marcus standing tall even as he knew what was coming. It looked like the man next to him, gripping his seat, his knuckles white but his face calm. It looked like a woman in the front row, holding onto her purse, her eyes fierce. I wanted to be brave, but I wasn't. I stayed in my seat. Marcus stepped off the bus. The others followed. I watched as the men in the street closed in. I heard the first blow. I closed my eyes. I stayed on the bus. I never saw Marcus again. They said he survived. Barely. They said he never came back to Jackson. Neither did I. Years later, I saw his name in a book about the civil rights movement. There was a picture of him standing with Dr. King. I stared at that picture for a long time, because it could have been me. It should have been me. But I stayed in my seat, and that's a choice I have to live with. Because sometimes the worst thing you can do isn't fighting back. Sometimes the worst thing you can do is nothing at all.